Would you ask Mr. Dolan to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Dolan?
Yes.
Ready to carry on?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Just some brief questions at this point about the health and safety file under the CDM regulations. Now, we've touched on this file before. And do I take it that you were familiar with the requirement under the CDM regulations for the principal designer to prepare a health and safety file appropriate to the characteristics of the project, which had to contain information relating to the project likely to be needed during any subsequent project to ensure the health and safety of any person? Were you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And can you help us? Did tRIIO, as principal designer, seek to obtain the pre-existing health and safety file from the TMO? Were those efforts made?
We didn't specifically ask for a health and safety file, although we would have asked for any information that would have been available that could help us, but we didn't ask for a health and safety file.
Right. Well, why not, if the whole purpose of that file is to ensure that knowledge is passed on from project to project?
It's not something that's been part of the tRIIO process to request the health and safety file from the building owner.
Right. And can we agree that as principal designer, it was tRIIO's role to prepare, review and update the health and safety file as the project went along?
It was, yes.
Yeah. And that was the duty that started in the pre-construction phase and was ongoing until completion and handover
Yes.
of the file? Yes. Who was it at tRIIO who was actually responsible for the health and safety file for these works?
The design manager would have taken overall responsibility for the process, which would have included making sure the health and safety file was created and was contributed to during the phases or various phases of the design and construction process.
And was that Mr. Wiskin?
That was Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
sorry, yes. And did tRIIO actually prepare a health and safety file at the pre-construction phase?
We did.
Right.
Yes.
And did it keep it updated as the works were going on?
Yes, it was.
And at the end, was it tRIIO's intention to hand that over to the TMO?
Yes, it was.
Right.
It would have been handed back. Apologies. It would have been handed back to Cadent, the client.
Right. And then it was their responsibility to give it to the TMO?
My understanding would be that that was the requirement.
Right, I see. Yes, thank you. Now, you've mentioned in your first statement that there were several concerns raised about the gas riser replacement works from March 2017 onwards. Can you help us? When did you first become aware of these concerns?
It would have been later on in the project. We had an incident with asbestos that was raised to me, and there was concerns raised around the pipe running through the stairwell in regards to vandalism of the pipe and the consequences of such vandalism.
Yes, I see. I'm going to take you to one of the complaints that was received in a moment. You've mentioned twice now, I think, this incident with asbestos. Can you just very briefly explain to the panel what happened? Because I think it does crop up in some of the emails.
Yeah, one of the flats we had difficulty getting access to. We got called to, Holland Gas got called to reinstate the gas supply. So that was relocate the meter to the new location, run the outlet pipe work to the appliances, and then commission the customer so that they had gas. In doing so, the engineer that was sent there drilled through an asbestos board. Now, we wasn't made aware of that until 2 weeks later when an employee of Express Builders went to the property to make good. So the incident that was referred to previously is that particular incident.
Right. And is it right that tRIIO actually had to leave site after that incident?
Yes, we was asked to leave site for a period of 3 weeks. I think it was approximately 3 weeks.
Right. And why were you asked to leave site?
Because of the incident, asbestos being in the property, it had to be cleaned up. That created some concerns in terms of the activity that was being undertaken. We had to do some work, so we closed the job down, removed the health and safety file and the project pack from the welfare facilities that we had on site. Right. And then over the coming days and weeks, we addressed certain issues and then recommenced the works. Yes,
and approximately when was those 3 weeks that you were off site?
It was around about, it was during March,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah. Now, let's look at an example of some of the concerns that were being raised. If we can go to RBK 403601. This is an email from Lee Chapman, one of the residents, to the TMO, copying in a number of others. And if we look down at the body of the email, sorry, it's dated the 20th of March 2017. And I just want to read the second and third paragraphs. He says, "We are sincerely concerned as residents living in the tower and that the fire risk that the recent installation of gas pipes has brought to the building. It's not just the installation itself that causes some alarm, but it is the risk that exposed pipes of any kind can cause to residents. The fact that these pipes have natural gas, which I'm sure you will understand is extremely combustible, makes us feel in grave danger in the event of one of the pipes being compromised." And then he goes on in the third paragraph, "You may be aware that recently the level of antisocial behaviour in the building is increasing, mainly involving children between 10 and young adults up to the age of 25. Given that many of the people who gain access to the building relatively easy due to the lack of security adds further alarm to safety concerns surrounding the gas pipes. Very few hours go by without someone smoking in the fire escape and sometime lights small fires, or should I say highly flammable drugs. In the event that just one of the pipes begins to leak, all people in the building will suffer and, more importantly, are at risk of death or serious injury at least. Please can I insist that you must take this issue seriously, as should an event happen, it's our lives at risk." Now, was this a complaint that you became aware of during the time that you were involved with the project?
I was aware there was concerns over as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the pipe and the risk or the concerns around vandalism, and
Yes.
that vandalism could cause a leak, yes.
Yes, and because it's right, isn't it, that others had complained about the risk of antisocial behaviour and vandalism causing a potential risk to this infrastructure?
I understand so, yes.
Yes. Was that a particular risk to the riser, in your view, that particular risk?
No, I think it's in my statement, and I make mention that whilst I considered it and took it seriously, and the rest of the team did, the pipe was a steel pipe, it was welded, and therefore it would be very difficult to damage, very, very difficult indeed to damage, and in terms of fire, it has a very, very high temperature melting point. So in reference to the issues around fire or vandalism, it would take, in my opinion, mechanical means of actually breaking into that, cutting material machines, which I wouldn't expect standard sort of vandalism to happen. I also drew on my experience in between 2006 and 2013. That was the last 7 years that I worked for National Grid. Between 2006 and 2010, I was the network engineer responsible for emergency and replacement for a quarter of London. And in that 4-year period, I'd never once experienced vandalism of any pipe causing a gas leak. And then for the 3-year period from 2010 to 2013, whilst working on the Gas Alliance projects, I was the duty engineer for the whole of London. That's when I was promoted to that senior management role, and the duty manager for London. And again, not once, and that was a 24/7, 365-day-a-year emergency service, and I can't recall once ever being called out to a gas escape resulting from vandalism. So I base my judgment that whilst the concerns of the residents was a valid concern, the actual risk was very, very low indeed, if not negligible.
Right, yes, thank you. Now, just sticking with this complaint email from Mr. Chapman, if we go to the second page and look at the second paragraph, he continues, he says this: "Having seen these pipes numerous times, I am seriously concerned about how I will get out of this building alive in the event of a fire with this added risk. At no point were we advised that a gas pipe would be installed in a communal area, nor were we informed of the need to be extra vigilant. At the 22nd floor, it's a very long way down from the window in the event that after 30 minutes of fire, our house is engulfed." Now, when you were made aware of these complaints, to what extent did you step back and question whether it was right to have the gas riser in the stairwell?
The gas pipe in the stairwell was, in our opinion, designed and compliant to IGM G5, and therefore what we had installed in the building was a compliant system, and therefore there was no concern. It was a compliant system unless we started to question the regulations or the specification. So in our opinion, it was compliant and therefore safe. So I had no real reason to question. As mentioned earlier on, the only option available to us would have not to have put gas into that building. And as we felt we had a safe and compliant route, there was no need to act upon it.
But as I think you've just made clear, that was purely looking from your perspective at IGEM 5 and not looking at the building regulations or the approved documents.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. Can we go to TMO 100165548 now? This is an exchange that Janice Ray of the TMO had with John Allen of RBKC Building Control. And if we start at page 3 of this, please, at the bottom of the page is an email of the 16th of March 2017 from John Allen to Janice Ray. And he writes, Janice, I am content that this work would be regarded as a repair, providing there is no change to the fire safety implications. A building regulation application would not be required. In particular, to ensure that the riser replaces a riser in the same position, full stop. Gas risers and meters are not generally positioned within stairways, or if they are, they should be in fire-resisting enclosures. They should also reinstate and fire stop any fire-resisting enclosures that are affected as part of the installation. So we can see that that's what building control was saying. Now, pausing there, and from what you've told us, it's right, isn't it, that you understood that work reinstating gas risers was not generally regarded as work that required a building control application?
That's correct, yes.
We can see here that Mr. Allen is saying it doesn't require, it would be regarded as a repair, therefore doesn't need building regulation approval, providing there is no change to the fire safety implications. Now, were you ever told that that was what building control was saying? That it didn't need approval, provided there was no change to the fire safety implications?
I wasn't personally aware of that email.
Right. And had you been asked at the time, are there any changes to the fire safety implications, what would your answer have been?
My expectation would have been we had a relationship and were engaged with a member of the KCTMO in sending our design through to the KCTMO. We'd have expected collaboration at that point if they had some concerns that our design, what we were submitting for their approval, would have created that situation.
Right, I understand that's the process, but if you'd been asked at the time, are there any changes to the fire safety implications involved in this riser replacement, what would your answer have been?
Yes.
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 And tRIIO didn't ever see the need itself to contact building control directly?
No, we went through the contact we had at the KCTMO.
Right. Now, there were a few more exchanges between Miss Ray and Mr. Allen over the next few weeks. If we can go to another one, TMO 100165548. This is an email from Janice Ray to John Allen of the 3rd of April 2017. And she writes this. She said, thanks. We have now got their commitment to enclose the riser in a 2-hour fire-rated boxing. Our assessor has already highlighted the breaches in compartmentation, and National Grid have confirmed these will be addressed. A number of residents very unhappy and perceive this to be a very high risk, and we're asking RBKC to appoint an independent consultant to investigate. LFB are saying, though not yet in writing, that they are unhappy about the riser being on the means of escape, but as it is already installed, not sure this will have any input. Now, we asked Ms. Ray about this during her oral evidence, and she said that the LFB were unhappy, but they didn't say that it presented a risk. And she also said that she raised this with the LFB because Cadent were not responding to her on the point. Now, were you ever made aware of the LFB's unhappiness about the riser being on the means of escape?
I was not personally made aware, no.
Now, I understand that you became personally involved in the project in around March 2017. Is that right?
Yes.
And as we understand it, is it right that in some time in March 2017, you were invited to attend a meeting with the TMO and Cadent to discuss these complaints about the original design? Is that right?
I don't recall personally being invited to a meeting with the TMO.
Right, okay. But as far as we can tell, before any such meeting took place, the design was changed. Can you just tell us briefly what led to that change in design?
So design one, the pipe in the stairwell was of a welded and screwed construction.
Yes.
It's meant to be welded and screwed. What was actually built, or what was introduced into that construction, was what we call a compression fitting. And that compression fitting was introduced into the pipeline at each of the branches onto the lobbies. So we went from a welded and screwed construction to a pipe with a different type of component in, which changed the requirements of ventilation. Therefore, we could no longer rely on the indirect ventilation down the bottom of the stairwell. We was okay with the direct ventilation at the top to natural air, but we needed to find a ventilation route to air at the bottom of the riser as well.
Right. You talk about a compression fitting. Do you mean, is another word for that, or another phrase for that, a flanged joint?
It is, yes.
And can you just explain what that means, flanged, rather than being screwed or welded?
Yeah, so if you can visualise a straight pipe with a T-piece, so we've got a welded T-piece in. At the end of that T-piece there would have been a thread, and that thread, the threaded valve, would have screwed onto that piece of pipe that protruded out of the vertical pipeline. The flange fitting enabled us to put a fitting on and tighten it up as opposed to screw it or weld it. So by tightening it up, it creates a seal via a gasket, which tightens it up. So there is no screwing or welding of the connection at that point.
Yes, I see. And I think what you're telling us is that flanged joints are less reliable in terms of leaks than screwed steel or welded construction. Is that correct?
It requires a different type of ventilation. They all need to be ventilated, but there is a higher spec of ventilation that's required when you introduce a compression fitting,
Right.
as opposed to a screwed or welded fitting.
Yes, I
Well, at the
understand.
risk of stealing Miss Granger's next question, why introduce a flanged fitting?
It is a very good question, and it wasn't part of the original design. It was introduced to speed up. We understand it was introduced to speed up the construction of the riser pipeline in order to get gas back onto those customers that have been without gas for 2 to 3 months at that point.
When you say we understand it was introduced, is that because you're explaining what your subcontractor
It was
did?
yes, the subcontractor introduced the fitting. It was managed by our site manager. We were on site. We were observing, checking, and we never picked that up at the time. It was picked up later and was addressed as we'll probably come on to.
Is it fair to say it was an error on site that those flange joints were fitted?
Yes.
And it should have been picked up by the tRIIO manager who was observing on site, but it wasn't.
That's correct.
And can you just explain to me why you're saying that affected particularly the ventilation at the bottom of the riser as opposed to the ventilation all the way up? Because wasn't the consequence that you then had to box in all of the laterals and the risers all the way up to floor 23?
Yeah, so if in design one, where we were boxing in the laterals to enable the lateral pipe, should a leak occur, to vent into the stairwell,
Yeah.
the ventilation requirements allowed us to have direct or indirect ventilation. at bottom and top. So we was able to comply with a direct ventilation requirement at the top because of the roof vent. And down the bottom, we had the door out onto the landing, which went into the atrium, which went to an external door. That was the indirect ventilation. And in our view, that was compliant with the requirements of G5, the ventilation requirements of G5. When the compression fitting was introduced, the indirect ventilation down the bottom was no longer satisfactory. So we had to create we had to put in place the ability to direct ventilate from the bottom to the top. And to do that, we had to install then the riser, the vertical part in the stairwell, in a boxed-in enclosure. So it became a segregated system from top to bottom and all the laterals. So the full riser system would then become boxed in. So it becomes segregated from the rest of the building.
Right.
So did you save any time after all?
No. Sorry, let me just correct myself there. The gas, in terms of the approach that was taken and able to get the gas back on by the 25th of January, it would have taken longer to put the gas on if we'd have, and I'm not sure how much longer. I haven't got that level of detail, but it was decided. There was a decision or a view that the gas could get back on quicker with the flange joints introduced. It was easier to introduce the flange to the other,
Yes.
correct design.
Yes. Can I just press you a bit on this ventilation point? I understand that the consequences was, and we'll come to it in the design, that you then boxed in the riser in the stair to create effectively like its own compartment within the stair, which you said would ventilate at the top to the roof vent, yes?
Yes.
And you said that you could no longer have indirect ventilation at the bottom, so you had to have direct ventilation at the bottom. How did you get over the fact that the riser is coming from the basement through a number of riser cupboards and other storerooms before it gets to the stair? There could never be direct ventilation down there, could there?
If you recall my response to design one, where the holes through the basement to the riser cupboards under design one would have been sealed.
Yes.
Under design two, those holes would have been kept open. So come back to the fire sealing of the holes. The only holes that would have been fire sealed under design two were the holes that were made into the flats. The direct ventilation at the roof, and if the boxing in had been fully completed, it would have run through the storeroom into the riser cupboards, into the basement, and then we would have created a vent in the basement at the boxing in to outside.
Right.
So we would have installed a ventilation point within the boxing in the basement.
So you were boxing in. I'm not concerned about the basement because, as I understand, the basement's got its own ventilation and is a ventilated space for all sorts of reasons because it's got dangerous substances in it. I'm really talking about the point from the top of the basement to the bottom of the stairs, those floors that you've got to get through. I still don't understand how. Are you saying that you would create a boxing in around that pipe all the way down?
That's right, yes. The boxing in would have been if the design drawing, on the design drawing, it talks around fully boxing in all of the design two, boxing in all of the pipe. That would have included the pipe running through the cupboard into the riser cupboards. So it comes down the stairwell into a storeroom, through a riser cupboard, through another riser cupboard, and into the basement, and then out to the road. The design, the fully boxed in design two, to provide that ventilation required the whole system to be boxed in as it ran through the full extent of the building, and then the ventilation would have been created down in the basement. So we had a fully segregated system. Although there was ventilation in the basement, and that would have sufficed for design one, we wanted to create a chimney type effect.
Right.
Now,
I see. And is it your evidence that wasn't complete, that boxing in at the very low levels wasn't complete by the time of the fire?
That's right, yeah. We'd completed the boxing in and the stairwell up to the 23rd floor or the 22nd floor. A number of the laterals were boxed in, but there was no boxing in completed anywhere else.
I see, yes. Can I just pick up on a couple of other things you said this morning about ventilation at those levels? This morning you said that there were louvre doors on the riser cupboards between the basement and the bottom stairwell. But our expert, Mr. Hancock, doesn't recall seeing any louvre doors in those sections of the building. Can I just check, are you sure that there were louvre doors at those portions of the building?
Yeah, I think on the picture that was put up earlier on, I think that was, we explained the riser route and we went to that floor. There is,
Yes.
you can see the door there with the louvers on.
slats.
That's it, the slats,
see.
yeah.
So that's what you're describing there. Isn't it right, though, that there was no ventilation at all in the room next to the community centre where the riser goes up a cupboard in the corner?
That's correct, yes.
So there was no direct or indirect ventilation there, was there?
For design 1, the indirect ventilation, it would have been about the storeroom being used and the door opening and closing out onto that landing, which would have eventually found a way up to the front door into the atrium. But in design 2, it would have all been boxed in.
Right.
So the ventilation on design 1 and 2 are different.
Right, I see.
There was no requirement to box in under design 1 because it was deemed it was compliant at that point. But as soon as the flanges were introduced, that design 2 came into being, and that's when the plan would have been to box it all in.
Yeah, so for design 1, you're relying on a storeroom cupboard door being opened, yes? Was any assessment done of how regularly that door would be opened?
No, and it's based on advantageous. They call it. It's called advantageous air movement, but there was no calculations done to confirm that air movement would have been satisfactory. It was based on engineering judgment by the designer.
Sitting here now, do you think that was a satisfactory way to design at lower level?
I think the design and the ventilation should have had calculations to support what was put forward,
Yes.
and it wasn't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just going back to the flanged joints, at the time when that change was made, should there have been a design review of the impact of adding those joints to the overall design?
Yeah, so I mentioned Mr. Johnson, Steve Johnson, that is the design manager, not Ashley Johnson, the design analyst who you see on the drawings earlier on. Steve was notified of the introduction of those flange fittings and went to site. Immediately come back and reviewed the full design and personally took control of the design change, and that's when design 2 became live, and that's when he override the design risk register. Again, the process of producing the risk register for design 2 still resulted in a risk score less than the threshold, but Steve override
Yes,
that.
I'm coming to
Okay.
that. I'll take you to those documents. What I'm getting at is that before that change was made on site, there should have been a design review, shouldn't there, to have assessed the consequences of changing to that flanged joint?
Yes, they shouldn't have been introduced without a design amendment, we call it.
Yeah. Now let's look at that revised design in drawing form. If we can go to tRIIO 501223. Now this is effectively the same drawing that we saw before, but if we can zoom in on the middle box again with the lines, here the difference is from the last design that the solid black line is now going around the pipe all the way around the lateral. Do you see that? So the bottom part, which is in the stair,
Yes.
as well as the bit in the lobby, is now boxed in. Is that correct?
Yes, the whole system would have been boxed in.
Yeah. And the green pipe that's the riser, that was to be boxed in as well, wasn't it?
It
Within
was.
the stairs.
Yes.
Yeah, so actually if this drawing were correct, we'd have black lines around the green line as well.
If this particular drawing, yes.
Yes. So we've now got boxing in the stair and the lobby, not just boxing in the lobby.
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you. And it says in the red text at the bottom, boxing to be open-ended into protected shaft to allow ventilation of the lateral pipework. So we've still got the oversized holes between the stairs and the lobbies to enable there to be ventilation across this boxing in. But once it comes into the stairs, it's now in a confined box up to roof level. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And then if we look at the drawing above it that's got red arrows above it. Sorry, if we look at the photograph immediately above. Yes, thank you. So we can see blue lines, which they show where the boxing in is going to be built in the stair. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Yes, the blue lines in this photograph, they're showing where the boxing in is going to be built.
That's right,
in the
yes.
stair.
Yes.
We've got these orange bars with a label intumescent vents. And in the text box it says, it's very blurry, but I'll read it out. All pipework, riser and laterals to flat entry point to be boxed in to 2-hour fire rated. Intumescent vents to be installed in stairwell only. Sleeved entries between stairwell and communal landings to be left unsealed within the boxing in. So taking that in stages, all the pipe work was to be boxed into 2-hour fire-rated boxing, yes?
Yes.
There were to be intumescent vents in the stairwell side only in this position, is that correct?
That is, yes, that's correct.
And sleeved entries between the stairwell and the communal landings to be left unsealed. So the oversized holes are to be left as they are.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And someone's highlighted, we can see the 2-hour fire rated in yellow. Was it unusual to specify 2-hour fire rated board?
No, that
No.
was the standard. Where boarding was to be installed and fire rated, that would have been our standard 2-hour.
Yeah.
Can you just help me understand exactly how this is going to work? As I now envisage this, there was the boxing in of the vertical risers creates a sort of chimney, which is ventilated to the open air at the top,
Yes,
and presumably draws in air from the bottom somewhere.
yes,
These lateral risers are sealed, as it were, from the lobby. Is that right? So if gas escapes, it can't escape into the lobby.
that's correct, yeah.
Now, I understand that gas is lighter than air, but if you got a significant leak into the boxing in the lobby, would there be enough draw, so to speak, to pull get that gas out of the lobby and up the chimney? And where would the make-up air come from in the lobby?
So the pipe in the lobbies, there was no compression fittings in the lobbies. It was welded or screwed, and therefore it's extremely unlikely that a new pipe would leak.
Yeah, but I mean that's the whole
But
point
if
of
it
the
did,
boxing, isn't it?
yes, that it's a requirement that you need the boxing in terms of. I can't answer that whether or not it would have been sufficient. The expectation would, and I'm stepping a little outside of my area of expertise here, that with that ventilation, with the air movement coming past, there would be what I call a Venturi type effect, where it could pull out any air within that area. The intermittent vents would have enabled it. There's got clearly a smell of gas as it came out of that location, into the stairwell.
But there's no, I mean, I don't know, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you've described any form of vent or air access into the boxing within the lobbies.
That is correct. There wasn't.
So drawing a mixture of gas and air out of the boxing would require some sort of flow, wouldn't it?
It would do. The thinking for the designers at the time was, as that leak, it wouldn't escape outside of the boxing up. It would eventually find its way out into the stairwell. The volume would find its way out into the stairwell, and as it found its way out into the stairwell, it would be taken out, and the intermittent vents would also enable that venting a small amount of gas to be vented at that point.
All right, thank you very much.
Yes, just on the intermittent vent, I just wanted to ask you exactly how that was designed to work. Can you explain what its purpose was and what it was there to do?
Yeah, Mr. Johnson, the design manager, when he produced Design 2, Steve's got a very strong background in gas transmission and higher pressure pipeline systems. And his view was that he wanted, because it was the actual boxed-in pipeline was a significant length. He didn't want. His view was gas shouldn't have been allowed to build up in that boxed-in area. So by introducing an intermittent vent, which wasn't a requirement of G5, it would enable, or it would prevent that gas building up. The intermittent vent, they close up, and I'm not an expert on this, but in terms of they would react to heat or fire, and they would close up and seal. should they get too hot. And that was his thing. That was his thinking. Although it wasn't a requirement of G5, he felt it was a higher level of protection that was being introduced because of the potential build-up. In the unlikely event that gas did escape from that pipeline, it would enable that to be depressurised through the Intumescent vents.
Yes, I see. So those vents would be open, allowing, you say, some ventilation from the lobby side out. Oh, sorry. If there was a gas leak,
Yes.
yeah, and up into the stairs because they're open. But in the event of heat or attack by fire, they would close, thus sealing the compartment away from the gas.
Yes.
Yes, I see.
They were placed in that location as well because it allowed access to, you can see there what we call line valves or Taylor valves. It allowed access to those valves for maintenance purposes at some point if needed.
Yes,
Because-
yeah. Yes, we'll come back to this in due course. But I mean, have you ever seen a ventilation arrangement like this in any other building?
I haven't personally.
No. So there was no design template that was being used for this design?
I haven't personally seen a ventilation system, but ventilation is part of the gas design process. I've been as I said, I've been in the gas industry since 1988. Steve would have been also. One of the things that we have to consider, primary consideration, is gas escaping from a pipe and how we vent that to atmosphere.
Yeah.
So this particular system was different because of the specific problems that it presented, but in general, systems are boxed in and vented.
Yeah. And intumescent vents are not mentioned anywhere in IGEM G5, are they?
No.
Can we agree, based on that they're not a sanctioned piece of apparatus for the ventilation of gas risers?
I don't know that, if that's the case or not.
Yes. And how did you understand the venting at the top of the stairs would work? I mean, if we pan out of this this photograph for a moment and look at this design too in the top of the stairs, we get no assistance from this drawing, do we, as to how the ventilation at the top was going to work?
Yeah, it's a very simple schematic drawing.
Yes.
Yeah, so it doesn't show how the ventilation or the access to the roof would have worked.
And again, just to be clear, in this second design, we get no assistance in any design drawings or design documentation as to how it was going to work at top level, do we?
Only that the boxing would have gone up to the roof vent. It would have extended into the roof vent and would have vented to atmosphere.
Yes, but we can't see a design for that at the top of the building, can we? And similarly, you said before that there would be boxing in at these lower levels, linking the top of the basement to the bottom of the stairs. Where do we see that on this drawing?
It's not shown. It wasn't shown on a drawing.
So how do you know that that was the intention of the second design?
At the time, I wasn't aware of the design that was ongoing.
Yes.
I do know that the site manager was arranging for Andy Radley, the site manager, was arranging for Express Builders to go in and review the basement and the rooms. That hadn't been priced up, but that was in process, and I think that's referenced in his statement around the basement as well.
Right. Yes, but again, no design documentation.
There was no design for it.
No drawings, no discussion that tells the reader how it's going to be boxed in at these lower levels.
The only thing on the design drawing, it says that all pipe to be boxed in and vent and holes to be left home apart from the holes into the flats which needed to be sealed.
Are you talking about the little insert drawing there?
I can't quite see that, but I know.
Sorry, if we zoom in on that again. And the heading for that is internal lateral pipe work requires boxing in on each floor as below. That doesn't tell you anything about the boxing in of the riser at low level, does it?
No, sorry, I was referencing the box in the top left-hand corner. I can't quite read what it says, but my recollection is that's.
Yes, I can help you. Let me just go back to my notes on that. So that says all pipe work, riser and laterals to flat entry point to be boxed into 2-hour fire rated. So you're saying that would tell everybody that it was going to be boxed in, not just in the stairs, but further down the building through the cupboards and the riser cupboards?
That was the intent from the designer. Whether it was adequate or not, I guess that's open to question. But the intent in terms of that instruction was the whole system was to be boxed in. And there would have been verbal dialogue ongoing between the parties that were involved in these activities.
Yeah. You said whether it was inadequate or not was a separate question. Sitting here now, do you consider that this design was adequate from a ventilation point of view?
I don't think the instruction wasn't adequate, no.
Let's look at the design risk register. You mentioned that there had been a full, a separate design risk register filled out for this revised design. If we go to tRIIO 501218, so this is the CDM design risk register. We can see it's dated the 24th of March 2017 this time. This time the designer is said to be Mark Bem. We can see it still gets a 17, but if we go to the bottom of the page, we can see that in the final row, this time under the manual DRA override needed, it has been ticked. And next to it, there's a comment in capitals which reads, welded riser system and specific ventilation requirements. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
So this time, the manual override has kicked in this time, yes?
Yes.
And there was a separate design risk assessment done for this revised design, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And then if we go to the fourth page, we can see the analysis that's been carried out. If we can blow this up, for the MOB specific hazards items 19 to 21. Yeah, we're just blowing this up. Yes. Great. So we can see there, we've got those familiar headings. 19 is breach of fire compartments. And if we track across to the right, the box has been ticked, identified present by designer, and then someone under MOB specific risks has written loss of fire containment as a result of breach. Do you see that?
I do, yes.
So someone's identified that as a specific risk. And then further along, if we can go to the right, we see some action to be taken, description of action, follow building regulations and fire safety order, seal compartments accordingly. Do you have that?
I do, yes.
So is that a reference to the building regulations and the regulatory reform fire safety order 2005?
It would be, I understand, yes.
Right. And we've just got a generic seal compartments accordingly. It doesn't tell us which compartments are going to be sealed and which not, does it?
That's right, correct, yeah.
Yeah. And then item 20, failure mode expansion, that's not ticked. And then below that, we get inadequate ventilation item 21, and we can see that has been ticked. And then the next cell along, we can see some specific risks identified, including asphyxiation, confined space, flame-through mixture, overpressure, explosion. And then if we go along to the right and the action column, we can see for this it says generic statement to design for operations to enable ventilation review on site, gas safe engineer review. Can you just help us as to what that means in terms of action?
I am looking at these statements. They are not helpful in terms of what was needed to be undertaken. They are very generic by nature. What happened with the design manager was that it was around the loss of ventilation compliance, hence the change to the design. What appears to be in the design risk assessment is some statements, generic statements, which completes the documentation, and I think we have to accept that it's not of the required standard in terms of this particular part of the process. Yes,
thank you. If we go down to the bottom of the page, the second blue header from the bottom is also relevant here. It says review, comments, additional information right at the bottom. And we can see that someone's added some notes to, first of all, to breach of fire compartmentation. We can see someone said welded internal riser system. Sorry, I'll just let the, stairwell considered a shaft in G5, common areas to be vented back to shaft, additional fire protection boxing required for protection of valves and flanges in shaft area. So a little bit more detail there, but it's still pretty generic, isn't it?
It is, and again, the reference to the gaswork design being adequate to convey that information to the rest of the team was not to the required standard.
And then the line below that picks up on inadequate ventilation. There are some more notes there, and we can see there what they say. They say, see gasworks design for specific ventilation requirements, sealed boxing and intumescent vents to be fitted. So that's what we get there. Now, in the documentation we see, was that the entirety of the consideration that was given to these aspects of the design?
My understanding was, in terms of what was what was documented would have been on this design risk assessment.
And what other consideration was given to the compartmentation and ventilation aspects of the design?
The full system was to be, in terms of the statement earlier on, the full system was to be boxed in. So it was to be boxed in with fire-rated boarding. The sealant used for the edges and the screws would have been fire-rated to 2 hour. So the full system would have been boxed in when complete. There would have been ventilation installed at the bottom of the boxing in the basement. And then, as mentioned earlier on, the boxing at the roof, the ventilation at the roof the direct ventilation in the roof was through the roof vent.
Yeah. But none of that was recorded anywhere, was it?
I'm not aware of it being recorded. No. It may have been, but I've not seen that being recorded.
Yeah. Was there any consideration given, so far as you're aware, to how inspection and maintenance would be achieved in the future with this gas riser?
Yes, so the intermittent vents would have allowed access, easy access. They would have been taken off and you could have got access to the valves. Otherwise, the boxing in would have needed to have been breached and to gain access to the pipe for inspection.
Yes. Can we agree that there are large stretches of the vertical riser that were not accessible, some not accessible at all for inspection because they weren't boxed in?
We do have something called an endoscope, which is in effect an internal camera which can be introduced into the pipeline to inspect it should need be. So that there are options around future inspection using that kind of technology. The access to the pipeline itself, in terms of what I've referred to earlier on, in terms of getting into it, would have been for the proactive element of it, so getting into the line valves that were introduced so we could extend it and then reinstate the boxing in. But should there be a need to do some visual inspection, then pipelines are cameraed. There is technology out there to camera.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have been a tRIIO activity. That would have been Cadence under their inspection regime.
Yes. Did you ever think about whether the basement, being an area of special hazard, made it unacceptable to box in the utilities sections and treat them as being venting in the basement? Was that ever considered?
No. So in terms of there's two different ways of looking at design 1 and design 2. Design 1, the decision was taken that it was a pipeline and fittings that were introduced into that basement, and there was ventilation within that there was the 10-inch gas supply to the boilers and various other different utilities within there. In reference to the second design, fully boxing that pipe in, it would have been fully boxed in, so it would have been segregated for the rest of the basement, in effect, segregated from the basement, in effect, becoming its own compartment, and then a vent would have been installed within the boxing into outside to enable that.
I see. So you'd go through the basement with the boxing in to outside.
Yes.
How do you do that? Haven't you got to go back up to ground level again?
There would have been a route. We would have had to have found a route out to external. So that's referenced earlier on around Express Builders going down there to price that up and review that in terms of how they would have achieved that. That was the next stage. It hadn't been designed at the time in terms of how we were going to achieve that.
Right. I see. Yeah. Going back to inspection and maintenance, do you accept that it was a weakness in the design that so much of it would be boxed in, it would make it very difficult to inspect and maintain, even though I know you've said that there are ways you can sometimes get around that?
The boxing in was for ventilation. That is a primary, that in terms of if you have a hierarchy of what you're looking to achieve, it was ensuring that it could ventilate. And then because the boxing in could have been, the pipe could have been exposed by cutting out the boxing in, that was the way that we decided to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was there ever any analysis done as to whether the holes in the walls through which the pipes passed were big enough for ventilation purposes?
No, it was engineering judgment on behalf of the designers, and if it was custom and practice that if you was putting a 2-inch pipe through a wall, you would drill a 3-inch hole, and that was just general. That was practice. That was years of experience over. But there was no design around that. There was no calculations to support that.
And I think it follows from what you've said. There was also no check that the ventilation of the riser from the bottom to the top would be adequate as a complete system. At
the time of the design, there was no calculations to support the design. Subsequent to that, I understand some work has been done, but at the time, it wasn't.
Was there ever any consideration of the effect on compartmentation of these oversized holes between the stair and the lobby before the completion of the boxing in?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yeah. Was there ever any analysis of the effect on compartmentation of the oversized holes between the stair and the lobby before the completion of the boxing in?
The primary objective was we were trying to get gas back on, so we left holes within the fire compartmentation, and therefore that presented a risk. So we was aware of it, but the programme was in terms of the priority to get the gas back on and then follow up with the boxing in.
So you did actually ask yourself the question, did you, or yourselves the question, what happens if we have a fire in this building before all the boxing in's been completed?
I personally didn't, and I'm not sure the guys. I can't answer for them in terms of whether they would have understood what they were doing. Clearly, we contacted the KCTMO around the drilling through the fire compartments, but it didn't. We carried on with the job in terms of the programme that we had. The sequencing of the projects was install the the riser system, test it, commission it, and then follow up with the boxing in and the other remedial works or the supplementary works to complete the project in its entirety.
Yeah. Was there ever any consideration of the fact that this stair was not just a protected shaft but also a firefighting stair which would be used by firefighters in the event of a fire in a compartment?
We understood it to be a protected stairway, and there very well could have been a level of confusion as to whether there was two purposes for it. The protected stairway, the designers would have deemed it to be a protected stairway, and whether they considered firefighters needing to get up and down, I'm not sure. I can't answer that 100%.
Can you explain why we don't see all of those risks identified in this design documentation and considered and explained?
I think the process was weak. I think we subsequently changed that, or it has subsequently been changed. The only explanation I can give, and it's not, I think it's probably a weak explanation, is that the volume of projects that were being dealt with on the contract, I referenced a number earlier on, it was around prioritising the higher level risk assessment, and that's where the risk register process came in. So every project went through a risk register. When it exceeded the threshold, another level of detail was undertaken on that. But it was weak. I think we have to accept that it needs to be strengthened, and it has been strengthened. So at the time, it wasn't sufficient for what was needed.
Yes. Would you agree with the inquiry's expert that a full design risk assessment for a multi-occupancy building should have also included many more topics than we just see in this pro forma? So we've seen the compartmentation, the expansion, the ventilation. They're the three things that in multi-occupancy buildings are being flagged in this pro forma. Would you agree that there are many more important topics that ought to be in a pro forma such as this?
Yes.
And those would include, I'm just going to give you a selection, means of escape in the event of fire.
Yes.
Corrosion.
Yes.
thermal expansion and contraction.
Yes, although thermal expansion and contraction was considered and was introduced, the design did provide for
Yeah.
expansion of the pipe.
Access for inspection and maintenance.
Again, yes.
Valves, including access to them and security.
So in terms of clarifying that point, yes, it would have been part of it, yes. In terms of the risk assessment, sorry, yes.
Yes, thank you. Now, I just want to focus now on the effect of the oversized holes through the stair wall and into the lobbies. But before I do, I just want to make clear that the inquiry expert, Mr. Hancock's, found no evidence that the new riser pipe had been broken or breached in the fire. The new steel riser pipe was intact after the fire, and there was no failure to contain gas in the pipeline. So I just want to make that clear. Is that your understanding as well?
It is, yes.
Yes. But the oversized holes that were there between the stairs and the lobbies is potentially significant in terms of the ability for smoke to spread between lobbies on the night. Again, can we accept in general terms that must be right?
The boxing was complete from the bottom of the stairwell up to the 22nd floor. And so any smoke coming from the lobbies would have entered the boxing in and would have gone out up on the 22nd floor. So there was the last floor. So unless the compartmentation was breached, enabling smoke to travel from the lobbies to the stairwell, then I don't agree with Mr. Hancock's view that from what he said. It was boxed in, it was contained.
So can we just agree, I think you make this clear in your statement, it was boxed in the sense that the work to the riser and the laterals in the stairwell was complete? Yes. But the work to box in at the lobby side was not complete, was it?
So on several floors it was. So in terms of whether, is the question whether, it wasn't complete on all the floors. It was complete on, I think, around about 5 of the floors.
Yes. And so for a number of floors, I think you make clear that some of the battens had been installed, but not the boxing in.
That's correct, yes.
And in some others, battens had not been installed either. I think, like you said, that was floor 6.
Yeah.
But do you accept that there would have been, I mean, I appreciate what you say about once smoke from a lobby comes into the pipe, you're saying your expectation would be it would go straight up the boxing in the stair and out at roof level, yes?
I'm certainly not an expert on whether smoke could have travelled from one lobby to another lobby by entering the compartment, the compartment in the stairwell and then back out again through the oversized hole. I can't answer that question.
Yes.
I don't have that level of knowledge or background to be able to answer that.
I appreciate you're not an expert on smoke spread, entirely appreciate that. Let's just look at a couple of images just so we can picture what we're talking about here. If we can go to MET 3016722. This is an image from floor 9 on the stairs. These were taken on the 30th of May 2018, after the boxing in the stairs had been removed. So just to be clear, as it was on the night, there was boxing in this part of the stairs, yes?
Yes.
And we can see the staining on the inside of the boxing, yes?
Yes.
And so what we're exploring is whether there could have been smoke travelling from a lobby, going through the oversized hole, into this boxing in, up to the next level and potentially across to another lobby, because there'd be another oversized hole in floors above this, wouldn't there?
There was, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And we see a similar thing if we go to another image, this time on floor 17. There are a number of these images I could show you. I'm just going to show you a selection. Yes. If we go to MET 3016516. Again, we can see it. This is, I've given you one at the bottom or towards the bottom, is really from floor 9 upwards we see this. And then one higher up, this is floor 17 here now.
Yes.
And we can see staining again within the boxing in. Is that correct?
That is, yes.
Yeah. Now, had this design finished, there would have been boxing in on the lobby side and on the stair side, so this shouldn't have happened. Is that correct? The smoke should not have been coming through that oversized hole and into this boxing in.
That's right, yes, because the acid was boxed in.
But because the works were part way through, it had been left like this, and then the fire occurred, yes?
That is correct, yes.
Now, can you explain why tRIIO didn't put in temporary fire stopping around these oversized holes while the construction process was ongoing and before all the boxing in was complete?
The explanation I can give is that once gas had been introduced into the pipeline, there was, blocking those holes in would have prevented any sort of ventilation. So, there should have been a programme of as the project was being sequenced and actually built, those breaches of fire compartmentation. There should have been a process of introducing some form of interim fire stopping that satisfied both the ventilation requirements and the fire containment. At the time, the process that wasn't, in terms of these reactive type works, once gas, the focus on getting the gas back on was a big focus, and therefore the sequencing is questionable as to that approach.
Can we agree that the gas should not have been reconnected until all the boxing in was complete?
Yes, I think that's correct.
And do you accept that tRIIO, in accordance with its CDM duties, ought to have been identifying safety risks like this and managing them properly during the project?
Yes, it was a role of the designer and also the contractor or the principal contractor to identify hazards and mitigate those hazards through a proper risk controlled.
Yeah, and in this respect, tRIIO failed to do that, didn't
we?
it?
Did not fulfil those obligations to the full. Yes.
Can we look at an email? This is at tRI 60985. This is an email from Mary Ryan at National Grid to Stephen Johnson. So you said he was the design manager.
That's right, yes.
Thank you. And this is copied to you. We can see that. You're CC'd into this email. It's dated the 21st of March 2017. And does that indicate that the contents of this message were being escalated to you because you're being copied in?
I think, yes, that would have been the intent, I'm sure, of Mary by copying me in, that making me aware of this issue.
And that date of the 21st of March 2017, can you help? Was that the day that it was discovered that the design had to change because of the flanged joints?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Yeah. Now, partway down this first page, there's a heading, Fire Escape. We can see the image underneath it. It's an image of a riser taken that looks like a riser and a lateral in the stairwell. Is that correct?
That is, yes.
And if we go down to page 3 of this email, we can see some text. And I want to read the top paragraph. There we can see Mary Ryan says, the agreement with the local authority was to install the new supply in the fire exit stairwell and box in to meet their evacuation requirements. This has not been completed, although there are ventilation holes throughout the stairwell, which if a fire incident did occur, would create a more unsafe situation. Now, can we agree that that's a very specific warning to you and to Mr. Johnson that the state of the works being incomplete could present a fire risk?
Yes.
And can we agree that tRIIO ought to have paid some attention to this email and made sure that the works were safe as they progressed?
Yes.
Can you help us? What was the response to this warning? Was anything done about this at all after this warning was received?
The approach we took was to commence and complete the boxing in of the riser.
I see. So just to get on with the works?
Yes. So the 20. This was. I'm just going to make sure I get my dates right here. So this was prior to the design 2 being introduced. So design 1, the riser in the stairwell was not to be boxed in, as previously mentioned. It was the laterals in the lobbies that were to be boxed in. So those holes into the stairwell, as design 1, was never to be boxed in. If you can go back to that picture, you see that's the flanged fitting, the black fitting on the pipe. It was flagged up at this point that fitting was introduced, and it was subsequent to this being identified to Steve that the boxing in the stairwell was part of the design change, the design amendment. So we were never going to box in that riser in the stairwell. They were always going to be left home for ventilation purposes.
Yes. I appreciate the design changed and that's how it was going to be when the design was complete. But why didn't tRIIO think about the design in the interim and the fire risk that it posed while the works were incomplete?
In terms of, it's a very valid point. And the approach to reactive risers being cut off was we need to get the gas back on. Referenced earlier on the performance calls every day, 2 a day, in terms of understanding where we are with getting gas back on. So the reactive programme, we took a different view or a different approach to getting the gas back on, which unfortunately had left some of these other issues unaccounted for. If it, in terms of a planned work, you don't cut the gas off until you've completed the new work, so you approach it in a different way. So this, in terms of if this had been approached in terms of commissioning the pipe once everything else had been done, so therefore there was no gas introduced into the riser and no ventilation issues, then it could have been done in a sequence that wouldn't have breached, or we could have followed it through. But because it was the reactive, it was done maybe 2 months before, the commissioning was done 2 months before, and it left these bits to follow, leaving a risk that we was following on from.
Yeah.
And that was the approach at the time, and that was the approach across the full MOBS program, reactive mob programs. This wasn't specific in terms of, or it wasn't different in the way that this job was done. It was, as I just explained, in terms of reactive works.
Right. Yes. There are a few email exchanges between Cadent and tRIIO following this email. I just want to pick up on another one. If we can look at tRI 501035. This is an email from Stephen Johnson to Mary Ryan that same day. And he says, Mary, let me rephrase the narrative below. There is still work to do. tRIIO are aware of it. The work is not compliant at the moment or complete, irrespective of why. I have not defended the work quality on site, all the reasons for being removed from site. And then he goes on and deals with other points. So he appears to be saying, look, we're aware of it. We know the work's not compliant at the moment. We're getting on with the work. And there's talk of being removed from site. Now, is that harking back to the asbestos incident where tRIIO had been removed from site for 3 weeks? Yeah,
what Steve's referencing there, the non-compliant element is the introduction of the flanged compression fittings, and the being removed from site was the asbestos incident, which is referenced in the 3rd paragraph below.
Yes, and what did you understand him to be saying about work quality? He says, I've not defended the work quality on site.
Work quality meaning the introduction or the introduction of the flange fitting.
Right.
And being removed from site. He could very well have been referencing the asbestos incident as well. It could be a combination of both. But they were the two, when I've read this, that's what I understand of his response.
Yeah.
To me.
And how concerned were you at this point? We can see you're copied in again. Were you concerned about what had been going on site at Grenfell Tower?
Steve kept me aware. Not every project, I wouldn't have had a level of detail of every project that tRIIO were delivering. When it was escalated to me, and Steve felt it appropriate to escalate to me these two issues. It was the asbestos incident, which clearly was RIDDOR reportable, so a serious incident that occurred, and also the fact is that we had a design which we deemed were compliant, and that through our own making, by introducing a non-compliant fitting, we had additional work to do, which was causing these issues that needed to be addressed.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm just looking at the remainder of my notes. I think I've probably got another 15 or 20 minutes to go. And I'm just wondering how we synchronise all this with the break this afternoon. I can either press on and then we have one break, or I'm happy to break now, take the afternoon break, and then I carry on.
Yeah, I understand. All right, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Dolan, I don't know how you feel, whether you need a break at this stage in the afternoon. The possibilities are that we continue now for another 15 or 20 minutes and then have a a break. We always have to have a break at the end of council's questions anyway, so to do that would lead to us having 2 breaks, though we're not short of time.
Yeah.
So I think the question is whether you feel you'd like a break at this stage.
I'm happy to proceed.
You sure?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, well, if you want to change your mind in 5 minutes, just indicate, all right?
Yes, will do.
I think it's best if you carry on, Ms Granger.
Yes,
try and
thank you.
combine the 2 breaks.
Yeah. Some more questions about ventilation in the new design. We've talked about these intumescent strips in the boxing in. Now, were these intumescent strips ever installed?
No, they weren't.
Can you explain why they weren't installed?
They would have been. They were part of the construction element of the. They would have been cut in to the boxing in, so they would have involved the boxing in to be complete, and they would have followed on after in those locations. I've not seen a programme to support that view,
Right.
but that's the way that I understand through talking to the designers. That's how it would have been approached.
I see. So you box it all in, and then later you cut in your intumescent vents.
Yes, my understanding. That's how it
I
would
see.
have been installed.
But we can be clear, I think, that they're not there. They weren't there at the time of the fire, were they?
No, they weren't.
No. And they were an essential part of the design and the ventilation for the design, weren't they?
They weren't required. But by not installing them, didn't make the system non-compliant with G5. So a fully installed system, a fully boxed-in system, ventilated at the bottom, at the top, as described earlier, would have been compliant with G5. When Steve introduced or decided to introduce the intermittent vents, it was on the basis of other higher sort of level specs that he would have been involved in the past, and there's a requirement under those specifications to install a way of venting an enclosed system every 15 metres. Hence why he decided to put those in, but they weren't part of they weren't a requirement of G5. That was just something additional that he decided that was required in that location.
Right, I see. I mean, just to be clear, our expert, the inquiry's expert, isn't satisfied that it was compliant with G5 in terms of the ventilation. You understand that? Yeah.
I've read Mr. Hancock's report. Yes.
Yes. But you're saying, had the design been fully completed, your view is it would have been compliant with IGEM G5?
Yes, it would have been. Yes.
Right. Just thinking some more about the ventilation of the riser through each of the floors in the stairs. Let's look at a picture of this at CAD 401910. This is a photograph of the riser coming through the stair floor before any boxing in occurred. And it's right, isn't it, that what the intention was is that there was a gap left around these pipes so that there could be ventilation through the floor, yes?
Yes, there would have been. So there's the 2-inch pipe going through a 3-inch hole, and the boxing in would have been 4-inch. A 4-inch boxed in. So that would have been the differences between the gaps between the pipe and the sleeving and the boxing in.
Yes. Now, as it exists there before the boxing in, it's got the benefit of all the air around it. But once the riser on the stair was boxed in and created its own chimney or its own shaft, to what extent can we agree that the concrete floor and the ceiling at each level would have potentially impeded the airflow in that design?
The designer's view, based on their experience, was that those, for want of a better word, gaps between the pipe and the sleeving going through the concrete floor was adequate for ventilation. But again, I can't provide any calculations to support that view.
No. Wouldn't it have been better to cut out the floor inside the boxing to create like a square or rectangle with greater ventilation around that pipe all the way up the boxing, if that's what you were going to do?
I think what should have happened, I think we should have, in terms of the design process, is calculated what size annulus was required between the pipe and the sleeving, and then if it required, as you just said, if it required the whole of that square area out where the boxing was to be installed to be cut out, that would have been, yeah. So there should have been, some sort of analysis and calculations to determine the size of the annulus, and that's what should have been installed.
Yeah, I mean, presumably the vertical riser was the first thing to be installed, was it?
Yes, it was, yes.
So you'd cut all those holes and sleeved them before the introduction of the flanged joints.
It would have been the process would have happened in parallel.
Right.
So the laterals on the lobby, there would have been a fabrication area outside, so it would have been built in modular form,
Right.
and then connected as almost like a Meccano set as we went up. So I don't know exactly the sequence, but that's how. And I think that goes some way to explain the compression fitting of being able to connect the modular bit in the lateral to the riser system. It was an easier way of doing that. It presented less problems.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, we saw earlier that there was a specification in the design for 2-hour fire-rated boards for the boxing in. And if we can go to your first statement at page 13, that's your MET statement. Here, you've helpfully set out a table of all the materials that were used. And at the very bottom row on this page, we can see it says boxing in of pipework, EnviroBoard, Fireboard, Uniboard, 12 millimetres. That's the fireboxing material. And then you've got 88 minutes. Manufacturer's specification is up to 2 hours. Now, just to be clear, was that the product used for the boxing in of the risers at Grenfell Tower?
It was, yes.
Yeah. And if we go to the technical data sheet for these EnviroBoards, that's at tRIIO 501377. This is specifically for this Uniboard version of the EnviroBoards. And if we go to page 2, there's a table at the top with British and European test results. And if we look at the line, the 5th row down for BS 476 part 22, which are the relevant tests, we can see the 12 millimetre board achieves 65 minutes insulation and 88 minutes integrity. Do you have that?
I do, yes.
And then at the bottom of the first page, there's a table. If we look back to the bottom of the first page, and it says technical data, 12 millimetre, up to 2 hour rated fireboard. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Now, saying it's up to 2 hour fire rated fireboard isn't the same as saying that this board has a fire resistance of 2 hours, is it?
That's correct.
And the board only had 88 minutes of fire resistance integrity, didn't it?
It did, yes.
So the board that was used did not follow the specification in terms of fire resistance, is that correct?
It wouldn't have been compliant with the requirements of 2 hours.
Yeah. Can you account for that error in terms of what was installed?
I think there was confusion around up to 2 hours, providing 2 hour fire rating, and subsequent to that we now understand it was 88 minutes. So that is an error in terms of the understanding, the specification of the material that was used against the requirement.
And can you account for how that error occurred?
I can't.
Now, reposition meters. As we discussed earlier, the new design required the gas meters within the flats to be moved from the cupboard in the kitchen to be located closer to the front door. Now, that location is also the position of the sole means of escape from the flats, isn't it?
The designers deemed the room next to the sole means of escape to be a separate room or a separate cupboard, and therefore it wasn't on the sole means of escape. So their understanding at the time of the term sole means of escape was the hallway itself.
Right,
and
I see.
The relocation of the meters to enable us to comply with the 2 metre rule in terms of putting it in that location was the room next to the sole means of escape.
I see. And do you maintain that that was a correct interpretation of IGEM 5, G5?
At the time, that's the interpretation of it. I think you can look at it. You can look at it either way. So, if you're taking a less risk, say risk is not the right, but if you're taking a view that actually it's connected to the sole means of escape, then it could be deemed to be on the sole means of escape. But that wasn't how it was understood when the designers were discussing the location of that meter location and where it could go.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment. Is it time we had a break? I think we should do that then, whatever. I'm sorry, I should have asked the stenographer when I asked you, Mr. Dolan, but I'm afraid I didn't, and it's time we gave her a break. So I think we'll have a break at this point, Ms.
Yes,
Grange,
that's fine,
and,
absolutely fine.
So we'll come back at 25 to 3, please, and then,
To 4.
sorry, 25 to 4, and then we'll carry on there.
Okay.
All right? And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're away from the room.
No.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
25 to 4, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Dolan to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Dolan, ready to carry on?
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, before we broke off, we were discussing the location of the meter in the flats and the fact that the meter position had to be moved to nearer the front doors because of the new riser replacement programme. Can we just look at iGEM G5, second edition on this? That's at RHX 705. And I want to look at page 38. And if we go at 5.2.3, at the bottom of the page, we can see it says citing meters with respect to sole escape routes within individual dwellings. And then below that, 5.2.3.1, it says, if it is proposed to install a meter in a sole means of escape within an individual dwelling, either the meter should be enclosed in a box, cupboard or other compartment which may open onto the sole means of escape from within the individual dwelling, which is at least 30 minutes fire resistant to BS 476 and which has a self-closing door, or the pipe immediately upstream of the meter installation shall be provided with a tCO. Now, can you just help us? What is a tCO?
That's a thermal cut-off valve.
Yeah, and can you just explain what the function of that is?
Yes, it will automatically close when the temperature in that location gets to a certain level.
Right, yes. And as we understand it, it was permissible by this technical standard to put the meters in a sole means of escape, provided they are either in this fire-rated cupboard, at least 30 minutes fire-resistant self-closing door, or the pipe has to have this thermal cut-off device fitted. Is that how you understand that part of iGEM 5 guidance to work?
It is, yes.
And does it follow from the answers you gave before we broke off that tRIIO did not consider this part of iGEM G5 to be engaged for the Grenfell Tower project because these meters were not being installed in the sole means of escape, but just close to the sole means of escape?
That's correct, a room that connected to the sole means of escape.
Right. So did tRIIO actually consider this point, consider whether this provision applied and reject that? Or are you making an assumption that that must have happened?
No, we did consider it and it was rejected.
Right. Now, it doesn't appear that any tCOs, thermal cut-off devices, were installed for these repositioned meters. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And nor were there any self-closing doors on the meter cupboards.
That's
correct. Is that correct? Nor is there any evidence of the cupboards having at least 30 minutes fire resistance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is the explanation for that simply that you didn't think this applied?
We didn't consider it to be a box, cupboard or a compartment. It was considered to be a room connected to the sole means of escape.
So you mean that the cupboard into which the meter went, you thought that was a room connected to the sole means of escape?
It was just, yeah, the designer's determination was that it didn't fall into this requirement.
Right. Let's just have a look at an image at MET 30s16651. This is an image taken by the Metropolitan Police of flat 22, which is on floor 5. Here we can see the meter in this alcove. Do you see that?
Yes.
And I think we can agree that's not a self-closing cupboard, is it?
No, it's not a self-closing cupboard.
And by definition, not 30 minutes fire resistance.
In terms of the designer's determination, is that was considered a room.
Right, I see. I want to ask you briefly now about valves, and starting with pipeline isolation valves, PIVs. Yeah. We heard yesterday from Mr. Harrison that Cadent believes that a pipeline isolation valve, a PIV, was installed in the ground on the east side of Grenfell Tower in the gas pipe supplying residential supply 2. Is that something that you can confirm?
It's correct, yes.
Yeah, so a PIV was put in there.
A PIV was installed,
Yeah.
yes.
Now, inlet isolation valves, when the service pipe for residential supply 2 comes into the basement, it enters at height around 4 to 5 metres from the floor, is that correct?
It is, yes.
And it travels along the ceiling until it comes up through the building. We've seen that in the photographs. We don't have any design from tRIIO about how the pipe layout and installation in the basement should have been designed. All we've seen is the photographs marked up by Simon Boygill, which I showed you earlier. Are you aware of anything else that tRIIO did in terms of that design?
I'm not.
No. Would tRIIO typically produce a detailed design of the pipe layout in the basement?
Not in terms of, no, not that I'm aware of.
Was it just left up to the installers to put in the service pipe in the basement in whatever way they saw fit?
It would have been an interactive process where the designers were talking to the pre-construction team, were talking to the subcontractor. So there would have been constant dialogue and agreement, and it was an iterative process in terms of the survey being undertaken into design, a design produced, the design drawing, which was the Gasworks 9 drawing, as you can see, and then there would have been dialogue. There would have been a project pack created, and the details of the route of the pipeline within the basement and through up the rest of the building would have been part of that process. But I'm not aware of a specific detailed design drawing that was available that covered that route.
Yes, I see. I think from that answer, what you're saying is it would have been determined on site in dialogue with the subcontractor and tRIIO.
Yes.
Now, we know that a valve was installed in the pipeline of residential supply 2 once it came into the basement. That was called an inlet isolation valve, an IIV. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, this was installed at height, but there was no ladder installed in the basement to get to it. Do you agree?
That's correct, yes.
Would tRIIO typically plan to install a ladder so that that valve could be reached?
No.
Can you help as to why tRIIO wouldn't install a ladder in this position? And what I mean by that is not just a ladder on the ground that someone can pick up, but actually a ladder that's welded into the side of the basement to be able to access that IIV.
Yes, I can. The reason for that valve is it's to be used in a planned situation.
Yes.
So any inspection of that valve or use of that valve would not have been for an emergency requirement. It would have been for a planned operation, whether that is for example, a 6-monthly inspection of the valve, and under those circumstances, a bespoke temporary works design would have been produced to enable the operative to be able to get up and do the inspection. The reason for not installing a ladder is it's open to other people to use. It would need to be inspected on a regular basis to maintain its integrity, and therefore the decision was taken that it's better and safer to do it in the way I just described, as opposed to putting something there that people could access,
Right.
and the issues around inspection and maintenance. So it was never the intention to put something there for constant use, because it was a planned frequency around when it would be used.
Right, I understand. Thank you. Can we go again to IGEM G5, RHX 705 at page 43? At the bottom of the page is paragraph 6.1.17, and this says, consideration shall be given to the provision of a line diagram at each building entry IIV depicting the dwellings served by that particular network pipeline. Now, is it your understanding that it's good practice to provide a line drawing at the IIV point?
My understanding of that is around the diagram from, or the drawing from the pipeline into the PIV, into the building, which would show the IIV. I'm not aware of any other line diagrams being produced showing internal pipework and the associated valves.
Right, okay. Now, just stepping back for a moment, we've been through a lot of different aspects of the design and the construction today, and looking at matters in the round. Can we agree that overall the design work that tRIIO undertook at Grenfell Tower did not contain sufficient detail about the following things? Didn't contain sufficient detail about how the ventilation would be achieved in all the laterals along the whole height of the riser?
Yes.
It made no provision for ventilation through the floors once the riser boxing in was completed.
I don't agree with that.
How about it made inadequate provision for ventilation through the floors once the riser boxing in was completed?
The ventilation wasn't supported by calculations, I think is the.
And can we agree that there wasn't any detail in the design on how natural ventilation would be achieved in the basement or at the top of the building?
That's correct, yes.
And can we also agree that the designer does not appear to have approached any building regulation or fire expert with regards to understanding or mitigating the impact of breaching the compartment through the stair walls?
Yes.
Now, in those circumstances, would you accept that tRIIO's design work lacked thoroughness?
I think there were elements of it that could have been improved or should have been improved, yes.
And do you agree that tRIIO should have taken more active steps to assure itself that its contractors and subcontractors were coming up with a safe and compliant design?
Its contractors producing a design or tRIIO producing its design? Just can you clarify that for me, please?
Let's say tRIIO producing the design.
Yes, we again, in terms of what was produced and what was shared with the supply chain, the contractors, there was definitely improvements to be made.
Yes.
In terms of that information.
When we spoke about this earlier, you said that there was an audit regime for the design in place, and there were 3 tiers of audits that were undertaken on all the works that were delivered. Can you explain how that audit regime didn't pick up the design problems that we've just been identifying?
So the audit is not around the design. There is an inspection regime on the operational activities undertaken. Our site manager would have had a requirement to do a number of inspections on sites. We would have expected our contractors and subcontractors to undertake their own inspections of their work. We had the client undertaking assurance checks on site, and also our health and safety team would have gone to site and undertaken inspections. In terms of, in reference to the introduction of the non-compliant flanges, that should have and was not picked up by our site manager. It was subsequently picked up by the client audit, Pat Kelly's audit, and that was communicated to Steve Johnson, and then that was addressed, as you've seen earlier on, around the design amendment and the change in design in terms of the boxing and around ventilation.
Yes, I see. And in terms of the construction work, can we agree that tRIIO's contractors and subcontractors failed to install the welded joints and put in flange joints?
Yes.
Instead, failed to install boxing in with a 2-hour fire-rated materials?
Yes.
And failed to install temporary fire stopping in the oversized holes between the stair and the lobby, thereby increasing the risks from fire while the work was incomplete?
It wasn't installed, yes.
Do you accept that tRIIO could have exercised much better control over its own staff and its subcontractors to make sure they produce safe and compliant work?
Yes, I think the sequencing of works could have been different, whereby the non-compliant elements of the work could have been avoided.
Yes. Now, just one final topic, just to return to something about the consultation process that was done over this riser. We talked before about the decision to place it in the stair and the options that were considered for that. And you talked about it being a tripartite discussion between Cadent, tRIIO and the TMO. Now, during those tripartite discussions concerning those options, was the need to consult residents ever raised by tRIIO or anyone else? So
the residents were informed via letters in terms of the works that were going to be undertaken on the reactive programme, and subsequent to that, at a later date, there were letters issued for the proactive works that were subsequently suspended.
Yes, I appreciate they might have been informed by letter about the works that were going to be undertaken once that decision's made, but were they consulted over the available options in terms of where to put the riser in the first place?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And did tRIIO ever raise that as something that ought to happen?
No.
And so far as you're aware, was there in fact ever any resident consultation over those different options?
I'm not aware of that happening.
And we looked at the email from Mr. Chapman about his concerns. Did tRIIO ever communicate directly with residents about their fire safety concerns in terms of the riser replacement work?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end now of my pre-prepared questions.
Right.
If we could have perhaps a 10-minute break, I think would be sufficient for questions.
Or thereabouts, yes. Well, Mr. Dolan, as I indicated earlier, when Council gets the end of her questions, we have to have a short break to enable her to check that nothing's been left out, and also to let other people who aren't physically present suggest questions which perhaps we should be putting to you.
Yeah.
So we'll have a break now. We'll come back at, I think, 4:05.
Thank you.
And at that point, we'll find out if there are any more questions for you.
Okay.
All right? Again, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence while you're out of the room. If you'd like to go with the usher, she will look after you, and we'll see you in a moment. Right, 4:05 then, please. Yes, would you ask Mr. Dolan to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Dolan. Well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you. Yes, Ms. Grange?
No, there are no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I just would like to thank Mr. Dolan for coming here today and assisting us with our investigations. It really is appreciated.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Dolan, on behalf of all three members of the panel. It's always very helpful and indeed very interesting for us to hear from people who were actually involved and had first-hand knowledge of what was going on. And I think I'd really like to say as well how grateful we are for your candour in describing the events and responding to the questions that we've put to you. It's been extremely useful, and we are very grateful.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, and now you are free to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Grange. Now then.
Yes, thank you. So we have nothing further for today, and tomorrow we will be hearing from our gas expert, Mr. Hancock.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. Well, in that case, we'll break there for today, and we'll resume tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow.